I know that most of you in this room know who I am and know about my family, but I'm going to give you a recap. So clearly we have 4 kids, which Kelly said, and that in and of itself is not that exciting, but how we got there is the interesting part. So we always knew that adoption was part of our plan. My parents, who are here, they tell me that adoption was always part of my plan since they can remember, so clearly since I can remember as well, and I'm really thankful to them for fostering that in me, just all growing up and always encouraging me to follow that calling, so thank you guys. So Brian and I got married in 2012, and like I said, we always knew that adoption was going to be part of our journey. We just didn't know our timing. So it turns out our timing was all at the same time. So I was pregnant. What Kelly left out of her story is that she, on the panel, talked about how she was pregnant when she adopted. So I was giant pregnant, sitting at training for adoption through the call. And I was like, yes, the one who's also crazy. Can I talk to you? And she was like, I'm going to shoot you straight. It's awful, but you'll be okay. So we had Grady in 2014. We got Clark in 2015. A week and a half later, we found out I was pregnant with Jane by surprise. And we were like, okay, well, let's do this, I guess. It turns out God was not done still. So 2 months later, we found out about Rock, the one in the glasses there. So I'm like halfway through my pregnancy with Jane. We bring home a newborn who's withdrawing from drugs and lots of other stuff. And that was when our family was complete. But somewhere along the way, I realized that this is like really hard. Like when they say it's hard and you're like, oh yeah, sure. You really just can't understand what that means until you're in it. And I was like, surely I'm not the only one. But we were in such a pit of just isolation and loneliness that it was really hard to get out of that. It was really hard to look around. And coming from neurotypical families, we were not used to needing that much from other people. So when we finally got to the point where we were just humbled enough to reach out for help, and we did, and things started to get a little bit better. You know, I feel like we got to like here, like our heads were out of the pit at least a little bit. And I started looking around and I was like, you know, I really can't be the only one who's going through this stuff. And we were driving home from a vacation with babies, which is a trip, let's just be clear. That is not a vacation. And I'm driving in the middle of the night, everyone else is asleep, and it hits me, this idea for a podcast to, you know, moms are busy, they don't have time to go and meet together always, and so a podcast would be a really great way for women to connect over this incredibly hard thing that moms carry the brunt of, you guys. I mean, we're the first responders, and we're the ones who are hit with the trauma more than anyone else often. So I shake Brian awake. I just tell him my idea in not very many words. And I'm like, isn't that cool? And he mumbles incoherently and rolls over and goes back to sleep. So in the morning, I was like, do you remember what I talked to you about last night? And he said no. So I told him again. And at the end of it, I was like, wouldn't that be cool to do in a few years, like when we're okay? And he was like, no, we're going to do it now. So 1 month later, we launched the Adoptive Mom Podcast. And we had no idea that it would take off the way it did. And we're so blessed and humbled and honored that it has, and that people really do seem to need it like I did, need that connection. So that's the Adoptive Mom Podcast in a nutshell. And like I said, you guys have been my supporters and my cheerleaders, and I'm so thankful that you're here tonight. With each new season, I've brought some new stuff, but with the 5th season, I decided to just go big or go home. So I want to tell you guys about some of the new implementations. First and foremost, the Adoptive Mom Podcast got a makeover, and I'm really excited about it. We hired a professional designer who just really got my vision for the podcast and was able to redo our website. And we have lots of products that are here tonight. There's t-shirts and cookies and all of the stuff that has all of the new branding. Also, we have a Facebook group that now has almost 350 members, which is so crazy that there's that many women that want to be a part of this community. We also joined a podcast network who supports independently produced podcasts, and the founder of that, Daniel Quinn, is in the audience here tonight. So thank you to Voice Press. So another thing that I'm really excited about is, consistently people have been asking for more content, more often, just more from the podcast. And this season, I'm super excited to announce that I'm doing a second weekly show and a 5-day-a-week Bible study guide to go along with each episode. Voice Press. So another thing that I'm really excited about is, consistently people have been asking for more content, more often, just more from the podcast. For real though, the team at Go Rogue is amazing. He's doing this all by himself. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but literally every light and camera and microphone. Because without you, this podcast wouldn't exist. Thank you for supporting me and encouraging me and listening to the podcast and being part of those 30,000 plus downloads. And thank you for being here tonight. I'm just so excited to be able to celebrate 5 seasons with you guys. Thank you so much. Okay, everyone, welcome to the Adoptive Mom Podcast. And you guys, this is the first live podcast recording. Woo! And for the first live podcast recording, we had to have a really special guest. And that special guest is actually my very first guest ever. So very first live guest and very first ever guest. So welcome, Ann Meythaler. Woo!
Thank you.
How's it feel?
This is
really popular?
It's great. Although I just found out that I'm not the first person to be on your podcast 2 or 3 times. But other than that, it's fine. I'm fine.
Sorry. I'll get you a laminated card.
Oh, that'd make up for it. Okay.
So I'm really excited to have you on the show. And like I said, if you guys have not heard her show, her episode, the one before, go to literally season 1, episode 1. Yeah. Super easy to remember. And hear her whole story. But I'm going to ask you to give us a snapshot of your adoption story and just your family story in general.
Okay, yeah. I'm going to try to make it into a snapshot. So
you will be graded on this. So.
Oh, no. Got married. Actually, foster care had always been kind of part of something that we talked about. My mother was in foster care when she was growing up, and my husband's parents were foster parents. So that was something that we'd always talked about. We got married. We're going to open our home to foster care, and found out at the time you had to be married for 2 years before you could open your home. That does not exist anymore. But by the time that we've been married for 2 years, we had our first daughter, Emily. And then along came Kylie 4 years later, and this nagging thing of foster care adoption kept coming back. So we opened our home. Actually, I think Kylie was 6 months old when we started going through the process to open our home for foster care. We were going to be an adopt-only home because we couldn't introduce the chaos and instability of foster care to
It's adorable.
I know. Wasn't I precious? So then got open. We sat open for 9 months as an adopt-only home and never heard back about any of the inquiries we made. And in that time, God really just used that time for me to launch the call in Northwest Arkansas. So I see that wait was necessary. But then we switched to foster care, and then we were open and closed. Our home was open and closed for several years, just different periods of time, but had 25 children in and out of our home, adopted 6. So now my biological daughters are 16 and 11, and my adopted children, my oldest will be 26 on Monday. And then I have a 25-year-old. My boys are 9, and then an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old.
Yes. Yeah, and we've talked about this before. You're part of the Accidental Twins Club.
Accidental Twins, yep.
/ kind of accidental triplets, right?
Kind of, yeah.
Okay, and so that kind of brings me to my next thing I wanted to talk to you about. So last time we recorded this podcast, you were in a really hard place.
Yeah.
And I am so grateful that you were willing to come on the show, but I'm amazed at your resilience to be able to talk about that stuff. And I think, that's why this show exists. That's why that's what we do, is we tell people hey, it's hard for me too. So what was going on in your world back then?
Oh, goodness. So I was right in the middle of my marriage had fallen apart. So I was single parenting all of my children. And the day after our last adoption, our baby was diagnosed with leukemia. So we were right in the middle of the hardest part of her treatment, navigating all of that and what that looks like for her and for her care, but also for the rest of my kids, plus figuring out single parenting and just shepherding their hurting hearts through a lot of trauma.
Yeah. And then I'm like, hey,
you want to talk about it on a podcast? It's going to be fun.
And you were like, sure, why not?
Sure.
I love that you were able to talk about the hard stuff. And back then, one of my favorite quotes from that episode, and I don't even know if you remember this, but you talked about your emotions in relation to color.
Yeah.
And could you give us a recap of what that was?
I don't know exactly how I said it, but I still talk about it because it still feels that same way. But I feel like most of the time when people's lives are just happy and everything is comfortable, you kind of live in this space of like the yellows and the oranges and everything is happy and wonderful. And walking through this season of hard felt like there was just this depth of color, these blues and these purples. And I got to experience all of that in a really beautiful way. And in a way that most people, I don't think, get to. There was a lot of darkness, but there was a lot of beauty to it.
Yeah, and you didn't allow yourself to escape from that. And I think that's another thing that we can all really learn from when we're going through hard stuff, which that's what we're going to be talking about in this episode is the hard stuff that we experience as adoptive parents. But I love that you didn't take the easy way out.
No, I'm a feeler of the feelings, so I like to, I will allow myself to just sit in those and feel them and I don't know, kind of honor them before I say, okay, we've learned what we need to learn here. Now we can move on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Whew, and that's a lot. So before we jump into the real topic that I want to talk about, which is when our kids have really hard diagnoses that have nothing to do with adoption. Yeah. But first, I want to talk about the diagnoses that do have to do with adoption. So when we're talking about that, what are we talking about?
Oh goodness, anything. There's so many. So we've dealt with reactive attachment disorder in my house. We've dealt with, a lot of that. But really, even just sensory processing across the board, almost every child who comes from a hard place is going to deal with sensory processing, things like that. So any diagnosis that has to do with their trauma comes up like that.
Right. And I mean, and those are all those behavioral issues and things that it's not necessarily that we expect them because, I talked earlier in the evening just about it's a type of hard that you just really can't understand until you're in it.
You can't grasp it until you're in it, right? Even
though people can say words like reactive attachment disorder, we're living in that yellow and, orange spot and we're like, what's that? That's not going to happen to me. And then it does.
Well, and you can, even in reading it, you're like, okay, that's going to be hard, but you don't recognize how hard it is until it's in your home, in your personal space.
So within all of that, we come to expect, to a certain degree, some of that stuff.
Right.
What we don't expect is things like cancer.
Right.
And so since you and I both have experience with this, I wanted to talk about that. So walk us through just your experience with, we talk about cancer, but you also have a child with developmental issues and you also have one with CP.
Yes.
So you've got a lot of that going on. Tell us all about that.
I don't know what you want to know with that, but parenting them is difficult. And when you're parenting a traumatized child and you're dealing with the trauma, there's a part of that that's expected. And there's a part of that it always feels like on my bad days when I'm not really all that healthy, I'm cleaning up somebody else's mess, right? But the disability side of that is different, and I don't ever feel like somebody created this. It just feels like God created this child to be how she is. He made her the way she is for a reason, and I have to just learn to parent her well in that. The cerebral palsy is difficult too. And navigating all of that and talking to our teachers about that, it's not an easy thing. And then, cancer is just, it's a whole lot of hard.
Yeah. It's a big C word and we don't like to talk about those things.
Right.
And we certainly, any child is the same amount likely to get cancer in theory. We look at the statistics across the board. So I think in our minds, we're like, we've done something really hard. Something like cancer is not going to happen too, but it does.
You like to think that you've already you've checked those boxes. Like, God, I said this too. Like, I signed up for a lot of hard, and I think there was probably a part of me that thought, well, I voluntarily did a lot of things that were hard, so maybe I'll be spared from the things that are difficult that take you by surprise.
Yes, and surprise it did. I'm sure. And like I said, I have experience with this too. My child has Marfan syndrome, which is a genetic condition. So again, every doctor's appointment, people are like, well, who in your family is the carrier? And I'm like, no one.
Right.
So that's always just it's a really crazy experience because you have all these trauma disorders. And then on top of that, you have something that's completely separate. And you're like, hasn't this child been through enough? Haven't we been through enough? But what I love about you is that you somehow made cancer funny sometimes. So, and we talked about this in the last episode we did together, but one of my favorite things that you post pretty regularly is your daughter and how sassy she was when she was on steroids. She was kind of a mess, right?
Oh, yes. She's a baby of 8, so she's already going to be a mess and kind of boss of the world. And then add cancer and the cancer treatment to that. And she just brought out the sass all the time. And the doctors and nurses always loved her and got a kick out of her, which kind of fed into it a little. But one of her favorites is there's one video, I think that's what you're referring to, that I post occasionally when I'm feeling that way, is we were in the hospital, we were inpatient, and she wasn't sick. It was actually inpatient for a really difficult chemotherapy medication she had to receive, so they had to monitor her kidneys and her liver and everything. And I'm trying to explain to her that she needs it's bath time, and the nurses will come around and they will make sure that you're bathing your child. And I'm like, you have to take a bath. And she's like, I don't want to take a bath. And I was like, no, you have to take a bath. And she looked at me, and I was recording it, just this whole conversation, and she looks at me and she gets her finger and she's like, I don't care, and I don't care. And I was like, I hear that.
Did she take a bath?
No, she did not. No, she did not. She won that one. I was like, yeah, you know those warm wipies? I'm just going to need those, and we'll just wipe her down and call it good.
And how many midnight Walmart runs did you make to get her cupcakes? Or
oh, yeah. We were always up in the middle of the night doing something, or making ramen noodles at 3 a.m. And I learned as the steroid stuff came, she took steroids 1 week out of every month for years. Stock up on, Starbucks cake pops and those Chick-fil-A. If you haven't had the Chick-fil-A gravy, it's amazing. So Chick-fil-A gravy was her favorite thing, and ramen noodles, or she would just eat the most random things, and she'd yell at me for tacos. So we were like, okay, let's go to Taco Bell. I'm sure they're still open. It's fine. We were all over the place.
Yeah. And so in the midst of all this, like I said, you made it funny. You made it you had to, right?
Right.
It's just such a dark time, and you have 7 other children that you're messing with and taking care of and dealing with and by yourself.
Yeah.
So what were some of the biggest struggles in just saying, this is not her fault. This is not anyone's fault. It just is. And that's hard, because I think as foster and adoptive parents, even though we don't want to, we look to place the blame a little bit. You're like, this is their mom's fault. This is their dad's fault. This is their environment's fault. This is the foster system's fault, or whatever. But who did you look to? Whose fault was it?
Yeah. No, I had a lot of really hard conversations with God about that, because that's really the only place you can look in that. And in that whole, whose fault is this space, her diagnosis, because it got put on the news, actually was a catalyst for her biological family finding us and reaching out. And we have continued a relationship with them, but they even reached out, concerned for her care, but then also just saying, nobody in our family has this. And I felt in that space too, I had to reassure them, I understand this is not a thing that is passed down. It just happened, and it's okay.
What were some of the hardest things you said to God in that season?
Oh my gosh. No, there, every question you can imagine, just I don't think I ever have said, I don't think God is real. That has never been a thing, but all the time, do you even like me just a little bit? This is really hard. And it was really hard because I had seen God do some amazing things through my work, through my job. He had moved mountains. Every time I prayed for something specifically for the call, it was done immediately. And then here I was, and my entire life was crumbling, and everything was hard. And it was a really hard thing because I'd seen him move mountains. And then I'm sitting in the midst of all of these things that I wish he would take away, and he just wasn't.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of hard conversations about that, and where he stands in that, and what he allows and what he doesn't allow. And I've had a great team of people next to me this entire time. So when you say I was doing it alone, I was parenting within the walls of my home alone, but I had people that I was texting constantly, these hard questions too, does God, did he allow it? Did he do it himself? What happened here? And I had people that I could ask those questions to, who I knew wouldn't judge me for it.
Yeah. Well, and you need that. And I think that, a few years ago, especially just in the midst of our adoptions and the Marfan disorder diagnosis and the reactive attachment disorder diagnosis, and just all of these hard things, some of which I had no one to place the blame on, I had to go through this journey of realizing that God could take my hard questions.
Yeah.
God could take those ugly thoughts that I didn't want to even admit to. They would float in my brain. I'd be like, that's not true. Don't even think about that. La, la, la. I can't hear you. And I had to realize, he can take it.
He can take it.
So what was that journey like for you? Just realizing those things.
Yeah. So one of the things that towards the end of Hayden's treatment, I realized was a blessing and started to be able to talk about was, we didn't have a children's hospital in Northwest Arkansas at the time. So every one of her treatments we were in Little Rock for. So I was driving her to Little Rock for 8 a.m. appointments once or twice a week for a long time. And she would fall asleep. I actually requested early morning appointments, so we'd leave at 4:00 in the morning and drive down. And so I had a lot of time in the car by myself because she would sleep the whole way. And I had all of these conversations with God. And I got to the point where I just realized, like, if you are who you say you are, you know my heart and you can take these hard questions. And I mean, I had the comfort to be able to say those things. And I knew, like, this is the path you put me on and you can take these hard questions. And I don't think he's shocked by any of that. He's not shocked by our brokenness and our questions and the hard things that we say and ask.
Absolutely. And I guess, in accordance with that, one of my biggest questions for you is just, was there ever a point, and clearly we know the answer to this question, but was there ever a point where you were saying, I literally cannot do this anymore? And clearly you did keep on doing it.
I mean, I did say that several times in
but
all
what
of that. I just didn't actually have the choice to opt out. So there was no opting out. Like, I definitely said, I can't do this anymore, and I can't do this. And I mean, you just don't have a choice.
Yeah.
You're going to wake up the next day and your kids still have to be fed, and you still have to, like, put one foot in front of the other and breathe and do your job.
It's like that meme where the college professor throws all the papers down. He's like, I'm done with this. And then in the next one, he's like, I have to pick them up.
Right.
So what got you back up? What got you through those moments where you were at the end of yourself?
Several different things. I have, three of my people are in this room who know when to send me inappropriate jokes and funny memes just to make me laugh and distract me. That's helpful. Always people just showing up. Those are the same people who on the hardest day said, we're not even going to ask anymore. We're just showing up at your house. You don't get to say no, because they know I would. I'm fine. It's fine. You guys do your things and sow into your own lives, and it's okay. And they would say, no, we're going to show up. And really just, I don't know, probably just being forced to do it. Those are the things. And eventually it got easier. It does get easier. You get through it.
Yeah. So reaching outside of your story a bit, as someone who you get a lot of SOS texts and calls.
Yeah.
How many of them do you think are because of this, are because of things that have nothing to do with anything other than biology and genetics?
How many of those SOS calls?
Or just how many adoptive parents do you think deal with these things?
Oh, a lot more than we think deal with diagnoses that have nothing to do with the trauma, and they don't know how to navigate that. I get a lot of those texts.
So what do they do?
Depending on what they're dealing with, I typically know who to help, but to say, you need to find your people. You need to find your people who have gone before you in this, who can answer your questions, who can sit with you in this. That's a really important thing. So that's always my number one. And make sure you have a good doctor. That's on the list too. I have a fantastic family doctor, and so I never worried about if I needed to ask those medical questions, even the hard ones or the stupid ones, that I have the ability to do that.
Yes, and when you're dealing with something that you've literally never seen in your family, there are a lot of stupid questions, quote unquote.
Well, and because, I'd never dealt with cancer before, so one of my questions is this caused by prenatal drug exposure, or does that somehow make her chances of beating this less likely? Those were some hard questions that I actually took me days to get brave enough to even ask, but you have to have your medical community that you can ask those questions to, and you have to find the other parents who've gone before you in this to ask those questions.
And sometimes there's really hard answers to that. In my own experience, Marfan syndrome affects your heart, and we have to make sure that he doesn't put any unnecessary strain on his heart, or even necessary strain. He takes beta blockers to even just stop that. But he was exposed to drugs with antihistamine in them, which put strain on your heart. And so every time I've asked a doctor, is that going to make things worse? They're like, there's just no research for that, which is a really hard answer.
It's a hard answer. And we get the same things with the chemotherapies that Hayden has taken. I know she's much more likely to have a secondary cancer as an adult. I've talked to other parents who their daughters will never have children, who they struggle in learning, and they have all of these issues, and we just won't know those things for our kids. And that's hard too, because you don't usually sit. I just sent her off to kindergarten this week, and you don't usually sit and look at your kindergartner and think there's a really good chance that you'll never have children, or that you're going to have a secondary cancer because of the medicine we had to give you to save your life.
Yes.
Those are hard things.
And, when we were talking about this episode and we were prepping for it and talking about possible topics, there were two kind of in the top, and this was one of them. And then the other one was talking to people, talking to teachers and talking to other caregivers about your child's diagnoses and how you almost have categories. And you're like, well, they're adopted and they've had a rough start. And so here's the list of things that are from that. And then also, and we had a lot of laughs about how awkward and uncomfortable and difficult that is when you see the terror in people's eyes. So how has that been for you, sending your kid to kindergarten and having to use the C word?
That was actually the moment on the first day of school that I cried, was actually having to explain that. So we talked about this, you say Marfan syndrome, most people haven't heard of that, and so you kind of have to educate them on that. I have one that has cerebral palsy. Most people know what that is, and they know it's not terminal, so that's just kind of an okay. They ask if she's, mobile and if she's verbal, which she is very much mobile and very verbal. And then...
What was her most recent verbal?
Yeah. She proposed to the pizza delivery man on my behalf. It was awesome. She has a thing that she really likes to propose to just random men on my behalf. She is on a mission. I have a great video of her we're going to work to find you a husband. I'm like, I'm okay. It's okay. You can stop on this. She chased down the pizza delivery guy and told him that he should marry me. And I was like, it's okay. You can go.
You don't have to marry me, I promise.
I'm so sorry, and I would probably give you a bigger tip, but that'd be really inappropriate in this moment, so I'm going to not. I've gotten to the point that I know now, I don't openly say, I had a kid who had cancer, unless it is part of that conversation. She's not in treatment. She's doing very well. But now that she's starting kindergarten, I have to explain that to her teacher, because she spent 2.5, almost 3 years just with me and with doctors and nurses, and she was sick all the time, and she wasn't playing with peers. And so how we see that impact her right now is socially. She doesn't know how to interact with her peers, and she doesn't know how to make friends. And so I was trying to tell her teacher that she's painfully shy and she doesn't answer questions. But we went to the meet the teacher, which was the day before school started, but she was so busy and I couldn't say it. So then I took the paperwork home to fill out that night and bring it back to her the next morning for the first day of school. And I go in, and she's showing Hayden where to put her code and everything. And she's like, okay, we're going to have a great day. I'll take good care of it. And I said, I'm sure you will, but I need you to she had sent home this, all about me paper. And there's one that says are there any other things I need to know? And I said, I actually, before I can leave, you have to read this box. And I'm real sorry, because I know when I'm about to say that to somebody, I'm about to drop a bomb on them that they're not expecting. And I literally watch as it washes over them, and they're like, oh, and they feel that. And then I have to say, but it's okay. It's okay. And she's looking at her, and I watched it hit her, and she was like, oh my gosh. And I said, it's okay. She's doing very well. And she's looking at Hayden and seeing her skipping around with the little blonde pigtails. And I was like, she's fine. But I needed you to know this before I can just leave. And it's an interesting thing, and it's a hard spot to be when I have to tell people, because I know, I'm about to drop a bomb on you, and it's ugly. And there's some hard stuff.
Yes.
And then I feel bad, because I'm like, it was the first day of kindergarten. They're supposed to be all happy. And I'm like, hey, here's the thing you probably should know. Yeah.
And those conversations are so hard, because you don't want to mar, their vision of your kid, and you don't want that to change their childhood, but it does.
It does.
And, I had to fill out the same paperwork this year, and at the bottom I just put, I would love to meet with you about rocks, smiley face.
Yes.
And then she was like, well, I have time right now. And I was like, oh, okay, we're doing this now. Well, where do I start? And she, just the fear. And anyway, I was just like, I'm very sorry. He's fine-ish, but good luck. And
she's like, can she play at recess? And and I was like, no. Treat her like a normal 5-year-old. I promise she is okay. It's fine. Just know that, if you're asking her questions, she might not answer in front of the group, because she's just socially very shy right now.
Yeah. And so, I want to sum up this part of our interview, because I want to give time for Kelly to ask questions. So you guys in the audience, and for those of you listening at home, sorry you missed out on this, but for those in the audience, go ahead and get your questions in. But Ann, I know that you've talked, it's kind of been pieced out throughout the entire interview, but if you had to just sum it all up into one thing that you would tell, advice or encouragement to adoptive families walking this path when they have a genetic or just something crazy come up that has nothing to do with anything, and now they're thrown into this, and now they're all of a sudden a cancer mom. Right. And I love that you say the club that what was it, the club that you never wanted to be a part of, but that you're so grateful you are.
Yeah. So my one thing is just you have to find your people. You have to find your people who are the cancer moms or the Marfan moms. You have to find those, but then you just have to find your friends within your community too, and really plug in and let them help you. I think that we so often it's a pride thing, but we want to take care of our own stuff, and we don't want to show everybody else our brokenness, and so we don't want to let people show up and help us, and it's vitally important that we let them do that, especially in those seasons where we're figuring this out and this new diagnosis and this new normal.
Yeah. And it's humbling. It's humbling to have to admit to yourself first that you are in need, that you need help, and that you're not normal, and that your kid's not normal. And those are all really hard things to swallow. And once you do, I feel like it's a lot easier.
It is.
But goodness. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to let Kelly get up here, and she's going to ask some of the more serious questions first. And then I have some fun questions for you.
Oh,
we'll see what everyone else has come up with as well.
Come on in.
I'm taking this right?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, guys. Okay, so we got some questions for you, Ann. Are you ready?
No. I think I'm ready.
Okay, so how did you balance parenting your other kids when you were working with a really sick kid? How are you dealing with kids at the hospital and kids at home, and what did that look like?
I mean, I wouldn't say that I did that well. And my kid's dad is involved, so he was there to help when I was at the hospital. So that helped too. But really, because Hayden was so young, she went to bed fairly early. She slept a lot, so I made sure to budget time to spend one-on-one with the rest of the kids, check in regularly. We did a lot of family meetings where the little girls would go to bed, and the rest of us would just sit on the couch, and I'd just say, okay. And it was sometimes they were fine. Sometimes we joke and play games, and sometimes it was like this mass word vomit of all the things that were going wrong, and I would sit there and just let them say those things because they need the space to do that. And I let them see when I was struggling too. I think that's really important for us to do so that they know that their emotions are okay. But scheduling one-on-one time, going to have lunch with them at school, all of that's really important. For my big girls, I'm a firm believer in mental health days. So my bigger girls, occasionally when they could say, I can't handle school today, I'd say, okay, let's stay home then. It's cool.
I have a follow-up to that, because I think that when you have kids that are saying really hard things to you, and sometimes you feel like you have no more capacity for that, how did you somehow find more?
Again, that's one of those, I didn't have a choice. You have to just take it and listen to it. And I know I'm a feeler of all the feelings. So I would just sit in that space and just say, okay, just remember to take this from them. They will eventually go to bed. I can go have my hot bath in just a minute and process all of this, but really be present for them in that moment, because that's what they need from me. It's not easy, because there were definite times where I'm like, I need to check out, but I just couldn't.
That's hard.
Yeah.
How complicated was it getting treatment for a child for cancer when the ink is not even dry on the adoption paperwork?
Yeah, that wasn't easy. That was an impressive thing, and I felt bad. I mean, she was diagnosed the day after adoption, and so as we check into the hospital, her birth name is up on all the things. You could walk through the halls and see it on the monitors, and I'm like, that's not actually. I don't know how to explain this to you, but that's not really her name anymore. So I actually had to call DCFS and explain the situation to them, and they were fantastic. So she was adopted on a Tuesday, diagnosed on a Wednesday. I had certified adoption decrees in my inbox Thursday, which was impressive. That is an impressive rate.
Yeah. Anyone who's adopted knows
it was very impressive. They got to me. I sent them, and Hayden was actually in surgery at the time. They were installing her port for all of her chemo, and they somehow messed it up and corrected her bio name to her sister's name first. And then I was like, that's not her name either. It's the other one. So then I had to go switch. And so in the course of that surgery, she was 3 different names, which they're like, that might mess up Medicaid. We're not really sure. We've never had this happen before, but we think it's correct now.
Oh my gosh, that is wild. That stressed me out on your behalf at the time.
I was like, can something just go right? Can we pick one thing?
Well, we've already mentioned in the show that you get a lot of questions from a lot of people in this area, because you're kind of like the boss of foster care. And I'm just wondering, how did you navigate all of the other questions that not everybody knew what was going on with Hayden at the time. You're still getting bombarded with random questions about foster care and bio parents and whatever. How did you delegate that? Did you answer that? how did you handle that?
I think, again, I had a really, really great team who let me delegate that, who I could just say, hey, can you answer this question for this person, and you answer this question? And eventually, everybody kind of understood what was going on and then took their questions for the most part to the team. But it's, again, important to have those people who can step in on your behalf and answer all of those questions when I just could not.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and one of my favorites was, didn't the team put a sign on the door of the office that was like, stop. If you've been around anybody that's sick or you are sick, please just do not come into our office. And I love showing up to the office and seeing that sign. Thank you.
So how did your biological and other adopted children react? Like, how did you even tell them the news?
Well, I wasn't there. I was in the hospital. They were home with their dad, who had to tell them. And I mean, the doctor walked in to the emergency room and told me, and then he's like, do you want to call your husband, or should I? And I was like, I can't speak these things out loud, and I can't send a text, so I'm going to need you to do that. And so he sat down and told them, and I think it took them a long time to process. Like, they didn't understand. They had a few questions at first about, is she going to die? And then we were in Little Rock for 10 days before we got to come home, and they got to see her again, and that was hard. But they all processed it differently. And one of my kids, within the last few months, has finally come to the space where he's processing, and he'll come to me and say, Hayden had cancer. And I said, yeah. She could have died. Yeah, buddy, she could have. And he's just now to the spot where he feels safe enough to ask the hard questions and process those. So they all processed it differently, but I think that it was just kind of like ripping off a Band-Aid. You just have to say it and tell them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You've mentioned that she's doing pretty good, and she started kindergarten this week. So what is her prognosis at this point? Like, what kind of treatment does she still receive, if any? Like, what's it look like for her?
Okay, so for a child, Hayden specifically had acute lymphoblastic leukemia, ALL, which is the most common form of childhood cancer. It is also the most treatable. So from the very beginning, her prognosis rate was, 96 to 98%. All of her genetics were favorable when they tested for it. There are a few genes that could make it so that it's a little bit harder to beat. And she sailed through treatment. She did great. And so her prognosis is still, it is less, relapse. Her chances of relapse are less than 1% at this point. She has been off of treatment for over a year. So for that first year after she ended chemo, we had to go monthly for them to test. They do blood draws and check her levels for everything, make sure that her blood is rebounding now that she's not on chemo. She's doing great. Now that we're in year 2, she goes every other month. Then it does taper down to going, I think, quarterly. And then some oncologists will track once a year until they hit puberty or until the children are 18. It kind of depends on the oncologist and what they're wanting to track. But she is a year and a half off of treatment now, and she'll have to be continuously monitored at least for that first 5 years. And then after 5 years off treatment is when a child with ALL is considered cured.
Wow.
That's a long time.
It's a long time. And she's getting old enough now. That was one of the things that I was thankful for when she was diagnosed. She was so young that she just wouldn't know what she was missing out on, and she wouldn't know that everything is different for her. And now she does. She's old enough that she's starting to ask the questions like, why am I the only one that got cancer and nobody else got cancer? And why do I have to go get poked by the needle and nobody else does? And she's starting to ask the hard questions.
That is really hard.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So this is the part where we usually do the outro, and then I get to ask some really fun questions. So I don't know if everyone else has had fun questions, but I'll do mine first, and then you can do yours. Okay. Ann, what is your opposite Enneagram number?
Opposite Enneagram number? I don't know. What is the opposite of my Enneagram?
What's the anti-Ann?
The anti-Ann? Probably a 1. A rule follower. Me. I know. I know. That's why I didn't want to say that.
I thought 1 was your wing. No,
I'm a 9-wing 8. Yeah.
Awesome.
I don't know what the opposite would be. But I guess maybe the 1, I have a child who's a strong 1, and she's my hardest child to parent because she's very stickler for all the rules.
Was I hard to parent? I don't know. Is it?
That's another podcast.
We'll discuss that later.
They don't have the mic, so they don't get to answer.
We can just say that they're shaking their heads no and saying you were a delight.
I was a delight. Okay, well, what is your guilty pleasure fast food?
Oh, goodness. That probably depends on the day, but I can never, ever, ever walk past a hot pizza. If I let that in my house, I'm a goner. I all the time think I can order pizza and not eat it. No, I'm going to eat the pizza every time.
We're just kidding ourselves when we're like, it's fine. You can go to.
There are a lot of things that I can ignore and let people eat in front of me, but pizza, yeah.
That's a good one. Okay, you're trapped. You're in trouble. There's danger. What 3 fictional characters are going to save you?
Well, MacGyver.
Okay.
And Sherlock Holmes.
Okay.
And Inspector Gadget.
Solid.
All detectives. That's a good crew.
Solid.
What was your favorite Go-Go Gadget?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I liked the hand that came out of his hat.
I like the propeller that came out of his hat.
That was pretty fantastic. Yeah.
Or the parachute. I still say Go-Go Gadget arm on occasion.
I used to pretend to be Penny and had a dog and like.
Did you have pigtails?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great show.
Now I just really want to sing the theme song.
I mean, you can. It's all right.
No.
It's your show.
It is my show. Kelly, what fun questions do you have?
I have a super great one that just came in. So you mentioned that you're now divorced. Should you go on a date at this point? Do you kind of lead with, I have 8 kids and like they got all these issues?
I mean, I think so. I think, yeah.
How's that go?
You got to just...
The pizza guy already knows.
The pizza guy knew. You know, I haven't had the opportunity to say, hey, I'm Ann. And then somebody to say, would you like to have dinner? And I say, well, you should know that I have 8 children. Now that I've never had that conversation, but...
I did like that question, though. Thank you to whoever sent that. Ann is wearing some rocking shoes tonight, and you can't see them if you're just listening to a podcast, but somebody legit wants to know where you got these.
Dillard's. They're from Dillard's.
Okay.
Dillard's.
Are they in the Sassy Shoe collection?
Absolutely.
How many Sassy Shoes do you have now?
I don't know. How many Sassy shoes do I have? I don't, like... You're counting? Jolene's going to count my shoes for me.
Jolene in the audience is counting them.
I don't know, 6.
Okay, there's the leopard print ones.
I have 2 pairs of leopard print shoes.
The gold
I
ones.
have some that are like a turquoise snakeskin. 2 pairs of the gold sparkly ones, and then these. I don't know.
Okay.
The teal ones and the orange ones don't count as sassy, do they? They're a lower heel. Thank you. Ryan says no.
All the
on
men
what's
in the
sassy
audience
and what's
are
not
so
sassy.
appreciative of this conversation right now. I feel like, Kelly, you should answer the 3 fictional characters question.
Oh, yes.
I was not prepared for this. But I have 7 sons, and so it would probably be like some Pokemon characters.
Okay.
They would probably evolve into things that could help me. I don't even know. Some Power Rangers. I mean, everybody could use one of those around.
Yeah.
At any given time. And probably a Leonardo, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle.
Oh, he's my favorite.
Yeah.
He's totally a 1. I'm just letting you know.
Obviously.
I didn't say I didn't like ones. You asked what the opposite was.
I know. Okay, I think that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you guys so much. Thank you so much for listening to the Adoptive Mom Podcast. I hope you found encouragement here. I need you to know that you are enough and you're doing a great job. We are all in this together, and I am over here cheering you on. Don't forget to check out show notes for this episode and other resources at theadoptivemompodcast.com. Thanks for joining us.